I'm just diving right into it this week for our best decks roundup in Marvel Snap. My first Jeff's pick is Bounce, getting some fresh life breathed into it on our latest card release in Surge. This card is a huge boon to any deck that likes to play out its cards proactively, and Bounce absolutely loves to do that. The fact that her cost reduction is permanent and can take one cost cards to zero makes her a phenomenal pairing with a plethora of one drops, letting you trigger your bishop extra and make a massive hit monkey at the end of the game. I think this archetype has a pretty reasonable matchup into the tech card heavy decks in the metagame, because if you're managing priority well and know your opponent's output range, you can typically maneuver around what they have going on a lot of the time. That being said, Bounce does struggle a little bit with decks that have bigger linear draws that can make larger numbers than you, such as Mr. Negative. In addition to this particular Bounce build, I also enjoyed a variation featuring Joaquin Torres of all things as well. In particular, this build featuring America Chavez as a support card felt insane, with Joaquin making absolutely massive numbers on cards that our opponent often wasn't expecting. While it's still early, as far as higher series substitutions go, in my mind, Surge has joined Toxin and Hitmonkey as a must-have card if you are a Bounce enjoyer. You have a lot of flexibility in which one energy cards you can be playing, though, with Nico Minaru and Silver Sable being interchangeable for other things like Rocket Raccoon, Korg, and Spider Ham for disruption or numbers, depending on what you're trying to do with that particular slot. My second surging Jeff's pick this week is a Victoria Hand Frigga Moon Girl amalgamation that felt really good at spreading out efficient stats all across the board, frequently due to the discounts that Quinn Jet provides on your duplicated cards. The basic idea is relatively straightforward. You get a bunch of generated cards with Moon Girl and Frigga and Kate and Mirage, and then you get one or two Victoria Hands out to spread those stats pretty evenly across your three lanes. You mix in a dash of disruption with Luke Cage or Snow Guard, allowing you to disrupt Limbo. You end up with a pretty solid package of things. Kahori's a card that actually really impressed me in this shell. While she's often a little bit clunky at 4, when you combine cost reduction from various sources like Surge, Zabu, and Quinn Jet, she becomes really powerful at 3 and especially at 2 energy when you high roll with her a little bit. If Kahori's missing your collection, but you have a lot of the other cards in here, I think there's actually a lot of exploration to be done with this shell in general. This second build I played a bit as well, featuring Moonstone as another way to give you multiple instances of Victoria Hand effect. Felt really clean as well. This particular build is experimenting with things like Black Cat and Makari as additional ways to get your hand empty, to give you a little bit more fine-tuned control over what Moon Girl is copying for you game to game. As always, I don't think you need to have things past the core of this deck, with Victoria Hand, Frigga, and Surge really being the crux of what's giving you your points in these games, along with Kate Bishop. And if you're missing things like Kahori or Moonstone, I'd encourage you to still try these decks and experiment, obviously trying out different tech cards like Shadow King, Luke Cage, Snow Guard. Other examples like Mobius and Mobius, depending on what you beat, are all great tools to be reaching for in your toolbox, as opposed to just copying down 12 exact cards that you find in a video like this one. My last Jeff's pick this week is another Surge variation and update from my favorite deck last week, featuring Batroc the Leaper and Hydra Stomper. These two new additions to the game breathed a ton of life into Silk, a previous metagame staple that had fallen out of favor. This deck list has a ton of ways to get really efficient stats on the board for low amounts of energy and ping pong them around, leaving your opponent guessing a little bit exactly where your final output range is going to be. And then we get to play a range of powerful 3 energy tech cards, in this particular case Luke Cage, Cosmo, and Juggernaut, to be able to both protect our cards from opposing disruption, but also bat around whatever our opponent is doing, in the case of Juggernaut, quite literally. Surge felt like a really clean addition to this deck overall, and I would include her, Sam Wilson, Batroc, and Hydra Stomper as cards you want to have to get power with this deck consistently. Rocket and Groot, one that's easily substitutable though, things like Nocturne, Jeff the Baby Landshark, or even Nightcrawler for efficiency can give you another card that moves cleanly around the board as an enabler for you here. Moving along to our high potential category, we have deck lists with promising stats on Untapped so far, albeit in smaller sample sizes. They could be the next big thing as more people pick them up for roundups like this one, but they could also level out to more reasonable expectations as their sample size grows. First up, we have a Surge Kitty Pride variation. Anytime Surge tags Kitty herself, you get really efficient way to bounce her in and out every single turn completely for free, enabling things like Hope Summer, Elsa, and Angela at an incredible efficiency rate. In general, I've been really impressed with Surge as kind of a secondary Zabu in these decks with lots of 4s. Anytime you play Surge on 2 and you hit any of these proactive 4s you're happy to play ASAP, you can play them out the following turn, keeping your chain going and getting you a lot of really efficient stats on the board. I think Enchantress is kind of one of the premier tech cards to be playing in these Zabu Surge decks, since she has a very reasonable stat line when you just play her out for tempo to keep the Surge chain going, but she's also a really powerful reactive card, giving you counterplay into a number of decks that you're going to run into in the format. As far as higher series cards go, I think Kate Bishop and Jeff the Baby Landshark are the ones that are pretty replaceable here. They're just pretty efficient cards that also allow you to move around the board, so things like Nightcrawler or Nocturne or even Spider-Man could be reasonable for enabling things like Angela and Hope Summers and then bouncing off of their path afterwards. I would say Surge, Elsa, and then Galacta and Gwenpool are things that are doing kind of something unique here that are important for the power level of the deck overall. Speaking of decks that play proactive disruption, Darkhawk is another one that I've really been enjoying Surge in as a card. Obviously, you've got a lot of powerful 4s here, so she acts as a secondary Zabu like in the deck before this one. She also works super cleanly with Absorbing Man. In the absolute dream scenario where you Surge on 2 into Absorbing Man on 3, you get 2 of those sparks going, giving you a 2 energy discount on everything you play for the rest of the game, in addition to extra stats, often letting you overpower exactly what your opponent is doing. This archetype also isn't short on tech cards with things like Luke Cage and Spider-Ham, letting you proactively disrupt, so that way when your Surge Spark ends up on them, you're not stopping yourself short in its tracks. Next up, we have a deck list that I enjoyed playing a good bit on stream that also got picked up by a wider audience, making it in the high potential category this week, and that's this little Quinn Jet archetype. It features Esme Kuko as our season pass card for the first deck in our roundup, but I actually don't think she's 100% necessary here if you're a free-to-play player. The basic idea of this deck is relatively straightforward and powerful. You've got card generators alongside Victoria Hand and Frigga as a way to get relatively efficient stats onto the board, and then Mobius and Mobius, Luke Cage, Shadow King, and Snow Guards Hawk and Bear give you lots of ways to interface with both the board and what your opponent has going on, so you don't have to rely on just your numbers to be racing, but you can be a good bit of disruptive as well. Moving along to our top performers, no one who's been playing a lot of Snap will be surprised to see Thanos here, but it is worth calling out here that the best performing variation of Thanos by a solid margin in our metrics for those climbing back to Infinite is actually this Spectrum variation. While it does have a dash of disruption in the form of Cosmo and Mobius and Mobius, this deck list is more about efficient stats than anything. Something that's worth calling out compared to a couple weeks ago is that Strange Supreme has predictably fallen out of favor in this deck, and that doesn't surprise me at all. His ability eating your ongoing stones is often actively detrimental, hurting both your Spectrum and cards that care about your board being filled, like Ant-Man and Dazzler. While the sample deck list on your screen here has a number of higher series cards in it, I actually think this deck list is incredibly budget friendly. You just need to make sure you're playing plenty of ongoing cards that keep your curve low so you can fill the board up early for Blue Marvel and Spectrum to be able to spread stats out efficiently later in the game. If you're missing something like a Goliath, for example, substituting it for a copy of Armor or Gorgon or Goose that has an ongoing effect that's disruptive at a similar energy cost works out very reasonably. The second best performing deck for most of the slices I looked at on Untapped is a Mr. Negative variation featuring our latest season pass card, Esme Kuko. This isn't a remotely surprising development, as Esme's ability wants to prioritize things like Gore and Iron Man and Sage as powerful hits that are also phenomenal cards to be inverting with Mr. Negative. A noteworthy call out in this particular list that was the best performing by a solid margin, the slice that I looked at, is the inclusion of a copy of Rogue. There's a lot of opposing copies of Mobius and Mobius running around right now since he's good against both Esme and Surge as our new card releases this week, and Rogue unlocking that card when your opponent plays it against you is key for your deck to have its explosive draw potential. If you're a free-to-play player, this archetype existed before Esme, so if you want to play it without her, Wong was previously the card that went into that slot. As far as higher series cards must-have, I think Gore and Sage are both pretty important here for giving you big numbers to copy with Taskmaster. Cassandra Nova, however, is a little bit less so and could be easily substituted out for something like a copy of Wolfsbane or Ironheart that works well when inverted with Mr. Negative. Third on our top performers list is a Scream Movers deck featuring Silk and Batroc as newer card releases. Scream is one of those deck lists that just consistently has excellent stats on Untapped and really low play rates. I would assume part of that is card availability. The deck's namesake, Scream, as well as Cannonball, are exceptionally narrow higher series cards, so unless you want to play exactly this deck, they're probably not in your collection. That being said, this deck list, as I mentioned, has been consistently top tier, so if you like the idea of it, I think they're a solid pickup that'll serve you well for your climbing season after season. The most popular deck on Untapped by a wide margin is Thanos. Tech cards, the Mad Titan, backed up by a bunch of different ways to break whatever your opponent has going on. Needs no introduction to anybody who's been playing a lot of Marvel Snap lately. That being said, I think it's worth calling out, as I mentioned earlier when we covered the Spectrum version, the top performers, that build actually has stronger metrics at basically every slice that I looked at, which I think lends credence to the idea that most Marvel Snap players like breaking their opponent's toys more than they like winning in this superhero card game. Behind the Mad Titan, the second most popular variation of archetypes is Surfer variants, which doesn't surprise me because in my opinion this is the best home for playing Surge as well as Esme simultaneously, so it's a fantastic twofer for getting your weekend missions knocked out in one go. Both of these cards notably enable it so you can play Sarah on turn 4 with some consistency, which really supercharges your draw. Esme also is a big consistency adder. When you play her on turn 5, she basically gives you an extra look into your deck for the cards that you haven't drawn yet, letting you find your deck's namesake in Silver Surfer that much more frequently. This archetype is also a tech card amalgamation at its core, with this particular build playing Killmonger, Rogue, and Juggernaut to break your opponent's stuff. And as always, if you're missing any of the cards in this particular deck list, simply replace them with your favorite other 3 energy card gamer. I shouldn't even have to say that. Closing out with a couple of classic crushers again this week. Older archetypes that are still putting up consistent stats season in and season out. We have the odd Darkhawk deck. This deck list is a true 50% or Jund deck for my ex-Magic the Gathering players in the audience, where your suite of Proactive Disruption, both Korg breaking up their draw alongside Black Widow, and then Spider-Ham, Moon Knight, and Black Bolt attacking their hand directly, means you have a chance in basically every matchup that you're playing. You combine this with pretty efficient stats from the deck's namesake in Darkhawk, alongside things like Stature and Hood's Demon, as well as Proxima Midnight, and you get decent spread across the board in most of your games, even letting you reach hard to reach locations. This deck list is also pretty forgiving as far as higher series cards go. I think Darkhawk is really the only one that's an absolutely must have. Things like Proxima Midnight can be replaced with something like Swarm for a budget consideration. Nico Minaru can be another solid disruptive 1 energy card like Iceman, and Cassandra Nova can be another 3 energy tech card like Luke Cage or Mobius M. Mobius. Lastly, Clog is an archetype that always excels in metagames where Thanos is popular. One of the drawbacks to the Mad Titan is the stones take up a lot of space on the board, so when you combine it with your own rocks from Debris and things like Green Goblin and Hood that even Strange Supreme can't stomach absorbing into himself, you often constrict what they have going on in their board in a way that tends to be very profitable for you. This deck list is pretty flexible in terms of higher series cards that it needs. I would say Kate Bishop is the one that's kind of unique and worth investing in. She's one of the best cards you can pick up, so just make her your next purchase if she's currently missing from your collection. Things like Cannonball and Red Hulk you can easily swap out for things that are other big stat lines like Magneto, or even a base Hulk or Gore in a pinch. Surge is one of the sweetest cards to release into Marvel Snap in some time. I think the game needs more tools like her that encourage players to be playing out to the board early and often, as opposed to holding powerful reactive tech cards like Shang-Chi, Shadow King, and Alioth. Esme Kuko is not overbearing, but has really interesting deck building considerations, and I've had a ton of fun playing her in a bunch of different things. If you want to see a number of the decks in today's roundup in action, be sure to check the link in the video description down below to my daily deck highlights channel. You can find the sweetest Marvel Snap decks I've been playing on stream, cut to highlights 7 days a week. As always, I would love to hear in the comments what you've been enjoying playing. If you liked my roundup here today, be sure to smash the like button. If you happen to be new here, consider subscribing to the channel and coming back again. I do weekly deck list roundups like this, Series 4 or 5 tier list, and other Marvel Snap game news updates, such as covering the recent economy change on the channel. I'd love to see you back again sometime. I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end of the video, and I hope if you're into gambling on Snap Packs, your next one is excellent.